Hello, my name's Joseph Watts, and I'm excited today to share a little bit more about one of my favorite composers of all time, Giacomo Puccini. So to start off, Giacomo Puccini once said, "Art is a kind of illness." I think this is the kind of mentality that Puccini lived with, where he really pursued art like an illness. A little bit about Giacomo's education and early life. Giacomo Puccini was born in Lucca, Italy in 1858. He came from a very musically gifted family, including five generations of organists and composers to the Cathedral of San Martino. So much so that when Puccini's father died, when Puccini was only 5 or 6 years old, it was expected that Puccini would one day become the church organist and follow in his family's footsteps. And that's exactly what happened. At the age of 14, Puccini became the church organist for the Cathedral of San Martino. Around this time, his family was struggling financially, and Puccini made money by playing music in local bars and houses of ill repute. This money, in part, was to support his family, but it also was saved a little bit for Puccini himself, which he used to do things like buy cigarettes, which later led to his ultimate death from smoking. Puccini began his musical education at the Puccini School of Music in Lucca. At this school, he was tutored by his uncle, Fortunato Maggi. Like I said, he had a very strong musical family background, and it was a great privilege that he was able to study with someone so close to him. After receiving his diploma, he received a grant to study at the Milan Conservatory from Queen Margherita. And this was an incredible opportunity. The Milan Conservatory was renowned for its musical prowess at the time. And it was there that he was able to study under some of the greatest composers that lived at the time. One of his roommates was also a prolific opera writer, and it was here that he really developed his musical talents and began to form his dream of becoming a prolific opera writer. A little bit about Puccini's relationships. In 1884, Puccini met Elvira Gamignani and they began a relationship. Now, at the time, Elvira was married and could not get a divorce. However, her husband was Narciso Gamignani and he was a unrepentant womanizer. So she was very unhappy in that relationship and chose to leave him in favor of Puccini. However, at the time, this was heavily frowned upon because it was essentially an affair that she was having with Puccini. And so she felt a lot of embarrassment and shame in her hometown, and both her and Puccini left Lucca and did not return for many years. At some point, they had a child, Antonio Puccini, who is the only known child of Giacomo Puccini. In 1903, Narciso Gamignani was killed by the husband of one of uh, the women that he had an affair with. And so, because he had died, Elvira was no longer married and she was able to finally marry Puccini. However, their relationship was rocky. It was definitely not a happy one. Elvira was highly jealous and threatened to leave Puccini on multiple occasions. And her fears were certainly not unfounded. Puccini was notoriously unfaithful to his wife. He had several affairs with many well-known singers, and he cultivated a reputation of not being faithful to his wife, so much so that Elvira accused her housemate, Doria Manfredi, of having an affair with Puccini. And she did it in such a public way, and the townspeople believed her because of Puccini's reputation, so much so that Doria committed suicide because of the effect. Later, an autopsy showed that Doria had died as a virgin, and the family was outraged because of this horrible thing that had happened. And so because of that, they charged Elvira with slander. She was convicted and sentenced to 5 months of prison. This event profoundly impacted Puccini, and he later influenced the develop and later it influenced the development of characters like Lou from Turandot, a slave girl who dies by suicide. A little bit about Puccini's musical style. Puccini's operas were phenomenal and are well regarded even today. And the reason for that is because Puccini developed operas that had an intense emotional expression. A lot of this came from Puccini's departure from some of the more fantastical elements of opera in favor of a focus on realistic portrayals of human emotions and struggles. This movement was called Verissimo and is attributed to Puccini as someone who uh, brought this realism and this real emotion into opera. Puccini was heavily inspired by Wagner, and he used leitmotifs to provide musical continuity in his operas. And these music connect the settings and characters together so that you can easily recognize them as you're listening to his operas. More of his style includes he would include rich harmonies and evocative orchestration. Um, his music was written for a specific setting and time period. For example, in Madama Butterfly, which is set in Japan, he used sounds that were associated with Japan at the time. Puccini's operas were generally through composed. He didn't tend to write in verses, rather, he composed his operas all to be unique throughout. And one more innovation that Puccini made to the opera was the doubling of key vocal lines by the strings of the orchestra. This gave more emotional gravitas to certain lines and allowed Puccini to uh, let the instruments evoke those emotions and led to the good reception of his operas. Puccini's first work was Capriccio Sinfonico, an orchestral piece that he wrote as his exit piece from the Milan Conservatory. However, he quickly decided that he wanted to pursue opera, and he wrote his first opera, La Ville, for a competition near where he lived. Now, he didn't win this competition, nor was he an honorable mention. However, his opera La Ville was well received by a small group of people, so much so that Puccini received support from someone and revised his opera from a one-act opera to a two-act opera, and it was performed in several cities around where he lived, which for his age was quite notable at the time. Puccini's second opera was Edgar, and this was a massive failure. It was overwhelmingly critically received, and it almost cost Puccini his chance to become an opera writer. So much so that the company that had funded Edgar didn't want to give Puccini a second chance. Puccini was saved by Giulio Ricordi, who blamed the librettists for the failures of Edgar and saw potential in Puccini. He staked his claims against the shareholders and gave Puccini another chance. And Puccini did not throw it away. He wrote his next opera, Manon Lescaut, which was a massive success. So much so that it was during this, after the release of this opera, that people began comparing Puccini to Verdi and calling him Verdi's successor. Following the success of Manon Lescaut, Puccini would write his three most famous opera, or three most well-known operas, even to this day. And those operas are Tosca, Madama Butterfly, and La Boheme. All three of these operas were written in conjunction with the famed playwright and poet Giuseppe Giacosa. Now, Giuseppe Giacoso greatly helped with these operas, and it's considered by many that the reason that these three operas are so famous today is because of the collaboration between the two. Unfortunately, Giuseppe Giacosa died in 1906, which ended this period of Giacomo's life, of Puccini's life. However, these three operas are still very well regarded today. Puccini continued to write operas, but his popularity declined somewhat. At the age of 60, wanting to reclaim his former glory, Puccini began writing a bold new story about a cold princess, Princess Turandot. Unfortunately, he never got to see the completion of this play, as he died of throat cancer before Turandot was ever performed. At the time of his death, Puccini was the most successful opera composer of all time financially, and Turandot was later completed by Franco Alfano. I want to take time now to listen to one of Puccini's pieces. This is a beautiful aria called Visi d'Arte, uh, written for the opera Tosca. Now, in this aria, we're going to listen to Tosca. Tosca is an opera singer in the opera, and she's been betrayed by a man named Baron Scarpia. Baron Scarpia has threatened to torture and kill her love if she does not agree to marry him. And here we hear her convey her emotions at this horrible bargain that's been proposed for her. And what I love and what I want you to listen for as we listen to this is the incredible gut-wrenching emotions you can hear in her voice as she sings of her grief and the painful feelings she feels, having been a pious person. I want you to listen to the very first two lines, a parallel harmony that translates to I live for art, I live for love. That's how many of us try to live our lives as well. And I believe it's one of the reasons why this is so powerful. Then you're going to hear that the music at the very beginning is limited. There's not the full orchestra behind it. It conveys a feeling of hopelessness and despair to this powerful opera. As the aria continues, Tosca's bitter words are suddenly contrasted by a beautiful soaring melody. And I believe it's the irony of the conjunction of the beautiful melody and the bitter words that makes this aria so prolific. It conveys a more full sense of emotions as you feel her love as well as her pain and her agony, and all of them mesh together beautifully. So let's go ahead and listen to a couple minutes of this piece. We're going to go ahead and pause there for time, but thank you so much for listening to my presentation.